The Buchanites had lived at New Cample for almost 3 years, a significant number of days for Elspeth and Hugh, as they believed that Armageddon would begin around 3.5 years since Elspeth had declared Hugh to be her man-child, a length of time that fitted with the events in Revelations regarding the woman clothed in sun. A fire had recently destroyed a neighbouring farm, a farm belonging to a man they considered to be one of their enemies. They celebrated as the farm burned, believing that God was punishing the farmer, and it was a sign of the beginning of the end times. On the night of the midnight manifestation, a loud voice was heard that seemed to come from the clouds. Children were led by Hugh White in singing, "Oh, hasten translation and come resurrection. Oh, hasten the coming of Christ in the air." Everyone quickly gathered in the main room of Buchan Hall, and soon they were clapping and singing and even leaping, according to descriptions left by Andrew Innes for Joseph Train. At the head of the room, by the kitchen fires, Elspeth sat, and once again, according to Andrew, her face shone so white with the glory of God as to dazzle the sight of those who beheld it. The whole neighbourhood was woken up by the noise, and they were soon gathered around outside Buchan Hall, trying to figure out what was going on. Mr. Davidson knocked on the door until someone let him in, and apparently pleaded with friend Mother Buchan to save all the locals gathered from the impending destruction of the world. But Elspeth told him not to worry, because she had realised her people were not quite ready for their translation. Andrew tells us that the light passed from her countenance. After taking time to reflect on this failure, Elspeth declared that they should undergo a fast of 40 days and nights to purify them for translation. She told them the fast would make them spiritual beings who would be light enough to fly up to heaven. She also told them she would not fast herself, as she would become transparent if she did. Hugh White also did not take part in the fasting. It began with them bolting the doors and shuttering the windows of Buchan Hall. They began singing hymns, and their friend Mother preached to them, feasting their eyes and ears on the words of God. Andrew wrote that Elspeth kept a mixture of hot water and treacle to administer to those who might need it. And it was the children whom were included in the fasting and an elderly blind member that were the main recipients of this treacle water. Not all of the Buchanites were happy with this though, unsurprisingly. Mrs. Hunter, wife of Patrick Hunter, who had protected the Buchanites in Irvine, became very worried about her children. She had never quite adhered to the rule against favouring her children and had been known to secretly sneak them sweets. She wrote to family members begging them to intervene. When they failed to persuade Patrick and the children to leave, she went to James Kirkpatrick, the local Justice of the Peace at Buchan Hall, and persuaded him to issue a warrant to make her husband and children appear before him. Doctors were present when they came, and when they examined the children, who were 8 and 10 years old respectively, they found them to be reduced to skeletons, having not eaten for weeks. Patrick Hunter was also examined, but he argued that the Justice of the Peace had no legal right to intervene. Then James Kirkpatrick produced a warrant from Irvine that removed Patrick and his whole family back there. This was presumably something to do with his abandoned coal merchant business. Elspeth was utterly furious and wrote a wrathful, damning letter to Mrs. Hunter, accusing her of being a servant of the devil. Possibly in retaliation, although possibly not, Mrs. Hunter told her circle of friends that Elspeth had told her to kill her youngest child because it had the spirit of the devil in it. The sisters, Jean and Catherine Gardner, who had been servants working for the Hunters when they joined the Buchanites and had joined the Buchanites along with them, then decided to leave the cult with them too. Catherine discovered she was pregnant, and Mrs. Hunter told her to go back to Buchan Hall and enforce her claim against the father. That father happened to be Andrew Innes. This raised a great deal of furore in Closeburn, So it was decided to send the now greatly weakened young man out to settle the issue. After recovering, Andrew consented to marry Catherine and took her back to Muthill until the baby was born. They rejoined the Buchanites with their daughter once she was born. Presumably the pretence of marriage stopped there, but that's something for later. This did mean, however, that Andrew missed the attempted flight from the top of Temple Hill. Possibly before the 40 days fast was begun, they had already erected platforms on top of Temple Hill. There was a large platform with a smaller raised platform in the middle. They emerged from Buchan Hall in a procession, tottering and shuffling their way up the hill to take their places. They waited for the sun to rise. They began to sing and shout, drawing attention from all around. But they were not raised up to heaven, and so they trooped back, dejected, to Buchan Hall, led by Elspeth and Hugh. Hugh was far from content about what had happened, and this incident marked the beginning of a growing schism between him and his woman clothed in sun.